I'm Bob Greenberg. I'm here with the editors of Grabbed, Richard Blanco, Caridad Moro, Nikki Moustaki, and Elisa Albo. The editors of this gender-inclusive anthology asked writers and poets to contribute pieces about what being grabbed means to each of them. The result is a collection of emotional works in prose and poetry addressing a range of injustices, including all forms of sexual misconduct, from an unwanted caress to rape. All right, Caridad.
Yes.
What's the inspiration for this book?
The inspiration of the book, actually, it's a great story. We were sitting at the Miami Book Fair in the Authors Lounge, and it was right after the 2016 election, and we were besides ourselves. We had poets, writers, we were there, Nikki, Elisa, and I, and we just couldn't get over the fact that we had elected a grabber-in-chief. So we walked over to go see Rita Dove, because Rita Dove makes everything feel better. And as we were sitting there listening to her, I said, you know, we should just put together an anthology and call it Grabbed. And Elisa immediately turned to me and said, oh my God, that's such a great idea. And when we were hashing it out after seeing Rita speak, and we realized there isn't a woman among us who hadn't been in that situation, grabbed either emotionally, physically, mentally. And we decided that those voices needed to be heard. Those stories needed to be told. And then a little bit further down the line, we consulted Richard, who was our oracle, and he was wonderful. And we sat down and had a conversation. And he brought up the fact, a very valid fact, that men too are grabbed. And that helped us to shift our perspective and our paradigm a little bit and realize that as marginalized people, we didn't want to marginalize anybody else, right? So we expanded our call, and we got phenomenal, amazing work from men, both cisgendered, gay. And I think it just rounded out the book in a wonderful way. So it started as a flash, as a word, as an offense. And from that offense, we built this incredible piece of art that speaks to so many people's experience, and that is already finding and creating a place to land for people who have not had a place where their stories will be validated and heard.
And the round off to that story is that Rita Dove ended up being a contributor. So,
yes.
So it's kind of like went full circle. And again, everybody has a story. That was one of the most surprising things that we saw in part of the journey of editing the book.
Absolutely.
How did you come up with the list of names? Initially, I think there's over 25. How many are there?
Actually, we have over 90 contributors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we have over 90 contributors. And we realized, since we were all writers, that we knew a lot of people, that we knew so many writers. So we didn't put out a public call. We didn't put an ad in Poets and Writers or anything like that. We just started asking people that we knew. And I mean, I think the furthest we went from that was Nikki asked the department at NYU, maybe.
Yeah, I'm an NYU alum.
Right.
I have an MFA from there. So I put a call on the listserv. But I think where we started was we made a wish list.
We did.
Because we were like, oh, we know the poets and the writers that write about stuff like this. So we made our wish list, and we got a lot of people on our wish list. We've been very fortunate in that.
Did you have anybody that like responded and said, I've never had a bad experience?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to say that we had, we had writers, and many were our friends also, who said, "Oh yes, definitely, they already had something." Then we had the ones who said, "No, I'm not going to give you anything. I don't want to." They just didn't want to. We're like, okay.
And there were some people, to their credit, that just said, "This isn't in my wheelhouse."
Right.
A lot of like straight guys that we had wanted that just said, like, I just don't have anything for this.
Yeah, there were a few women as well. And then we had some who, you know, we said, well, maybe, you know, maybe you think you don't have anything. Why don't you, you know, kind of dig a little deeper, check out your work. And they started sending work in. We have one contributor in particular, Catherine Prescott, who sent one, and then she sent another, and then she sent another, and she realized that she had much more work on the topic than she had thought. And then there were some we really wanted them to contribute, and they said, no, I don't have anything. And we said, well, why don't you write something? And we have several pieces, of course, including the introduction, the forward, the afterword, but we have several works, poems, and essays that were written precisely for this anthology. So,
a piece I really love is from Yvonne Cassidy. She's an Irish writer, and she wrote her piece specifically for this book, and it's fantastic and very vulnerable and moving. So we did get a lot of that. So we inspired people to write with our call, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you say?
And that's extended over into our website, where we put prompts and encourage people to be generating work, because that's part of the process. The catharsis behind this project, you know, is ongoing.
What percentage of the people do you think were original works just for this book, as compared to people that had things in their portfolio?
I'd say about half,
or more,
or maybe a little more, maybe a little more than half.
Yeah.
Like the poet that Elisa referenced, Catherine Esposito Prescott, originally said, "I have nothing," and she wrote 4 poems for grabs. So yeah, maybe a little bit more than half.
Yeah.
And were your essays, Carrie and Nikki, did you have those before, or did you write them for this?
We wrote them.
I wrote
mine for Grabbed, and I believe Nikki too.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah.
I was sort of half and half. I was in the middle of writing a book, and all this was on my mind, and so my piece was sort of now that I think about it, actually was totally influenced by the work we were doing. Yeah. It was kind of, it had never been published before. So, I also think it speaks to, like, when we, you know, what we're finding in these presentations that we do, they're cathartic, even when, you know, when we're with the audience members, and it's interesting because even some writers are used to sort of, their lives are open book. They write about stuff, hard stuff. Even for writers, this is a topic that is hard sometimes for even writers, and it's just buried underneath. And so that's part of, like, what Carrie and what Nikki's done with such a great website is that, you know, this is not just an anthology to read and put away on your bookshelf, but this is an anthology to go through that process as well, share it with other people. It's a book you pass on, I think. So that was really one of the most surprising things we found with the authors, and what's happening now with these appearances, where sometimes I'm feeling like we're not. We need to get someone in the room here because we need to pray. I mean, it's really cathartic.
I think when you share a story that's as vulnerable as the stories and the poems in this book, it gives people permission to be vulnerable as well. It gives them a sense of camaraderie, because they understand that if we're willing to share our own truths, their truths are safe with us. And I think that's really been the momentum behind all of the readings that we've had. There hasn't been one where we haven't had either someone privately reach out to us and let us know their own story, or someone refer us to someone who really could use this book because they have a story. So every single one. I actually gave a talk yesterday to a group of students, and it was unbelievable what came out of that meeting. And it's so good because we're giving people permission to have a dialogue that should have been had a long time ago, but because of the volatile and vulnerable nature of the conversation, people have been loath to get it started. And I believe this book is doing that.
Well, I was impressed by the ages, not of the authors, but of what they wrote about the little girl on the airplane when she was 7 and she had to climb over somebody to get out of her seat. and the one about the obscene phone calls.
Yeah, I wrote that one.
Nikki's, yeah.
That was for how many years?
Yeah.
Until you got, and you asked your mother to get caller ID or
Begged her.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then it just came as part of the package.
Mhm.
Right.
And then I never expected when you hit redial or call last caller, but let the readers read that. But they were about young people. And when I read about the Me Too movement and followed it on TV, it was always about adults and it was always about women. And in your book, it was 7, the youngest story, younger than
There's
7.
probably even
Oh.
younger references.
Right, probably even younger.
Unfortunately, this is something that happens to probably male and female, even babies,
Right.
Yeah.
toddlers, young children. And many of us have experienced, had multiple experiences in childhood, but when you're a child, you don't know really what's going on. And many times it's from a trusted person, a family, or a family friend or somebody close by. When you're a teenager, again, a lot of times, you think it's your fault that you somehow brought it on. That's something that happens in my piece. I didn't speak about, for decades. I didn't write about it for decades because, you think that somehow it must have been your fault. And there comes a point many, many years later where you suddenly wake up like I do in my poem and you go, wait a minute, that was not my fault. I mean, obviously, if somebody is 10 years older than you are when you're a teenager, it cannot be your fault. And so, yeah, there's a lot of, you're right, that's a good observation. There's a lot of references to childhood. And those are the things we kind of, that these writers carry through them. And I think that's why, as Carrie was saying, so many people can relate, and it can be so cathartic because you realize, oh, this happened to others as well.
And they believed me.
Yeah.
They believed me.
Well, and children are so vulnerable, but I think what's really interesting about our book is that the writers were able to put that vulnerability, that hurt, on the page. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. There were a lot of tears and hard moments for sure for all of our writers when writing this, writing their pieces. Yeah.
And I think we're all like, I was surprised when I came on board as an editor as well. I was like, what do you mean there's no book like this yet? And it speaks to that same thing. It's just a hard thing. And there really is. I thought surely there must have been an anthology like this before. But also about where your point speaks to what we're finding too, and what's coming up in the conversations with our audiences and groups, is that this is universal. This is across a socioeconomic, across cross-cultural, and that's why also the decision to include not just women was also so critical, because in a way it validates it even more by saying, you know what, it's not just women talking, which I think the public can misperceive or misogynistically misperceive that element. And it kind of speaks to that idea even more powerfully, because from suburban neighborhoods to inner city to whatever you want, from Cuban to like WASP, from across every spectrum and age.
This all happened in Madagascar. I mean, we really got stories that were from all over the globe.
Yeah.
How many people did you find had never told their story publicly, and even maybe family members thought, well, if I put this in a book, my mother's going to read it or my sister's going to read it, and they've never told anybody? Did that happen?
A lot.
Most.
A lot. Yeah. We got emails like that, somebody even said, I don't want to say who it is, but it was a very vulnerable piece. And this person said, I don't even know if I want to put this in there. And they really had to think about it. And they did, fortunately, but I was encouraging. So.
Well, and Yvonne Cassidy, who Nikki mentioned, had an essay come from her piece in the book, because it's opened up this whole conversation for her as she posted with her family, and it's been like wonderful. Many of these stories, you know, you just push them down, and you were taught to just kind of suck it up and keep going. And so it's really like unearthing these truths that maybe even before I started writing my story, I didn't even really know how I felt about it.
Right.
And it took the act of writing to articulate that.
So this
And even yesterday, I read it out loud for the first time, and I found myself fighting tears because I had never voiced it, never said it.
I'm going to go ahead, Richard.
Oh, no. I
thought this might be a good time for our audience to hear some of these.
Okay.
Do we have a volunteer who'd like to go first?
Well, I thought maybe because it speaks exactly to what you were just talking about. I have 2 poems in the book, and the first one I wrote quite a few years ago, but the second one I wrote during this process of this book. And it was just, you know, and Richard was speaking to this before also, it just, suddenly I was able to articulate this. I even asked my mother a question, you know, and was able to approach her about something in a way that I had never been able to talk to her about. And I loved her response in the sense that she got really mad and she accepted it because in the past, it was something she wanted to ignore because it was something that apparently, you know, she wasn't even wanting to go there, that had to do with a family member. So I actually went through that experience here. So if that's all right, I think I may go ahead and read. I'm going to read the second poem that I have in here, and it's called At Any Age. I'm nearly 60 in my mother's kitchen when she asks, "What happened at 16? How?" She's looking at me, her eyes a clear blue. She knows I've written about it, gather the stories of others, turn trauma into art. I tell her, with his fingers, he put them inside. Hijo puta, she says. I lay on a sofa, didn't move, didn't speak. My cousin, her beloved niece married less than a year, lay sleeping on the other side of the wall in their tiny apartment in Bayside, New York. He whispered, "Meet me in the shower." I dug into the sofa seam, blanket over my head, frozen, until the front door clicked shut. Why didn't you tell me? I did, several times, tried to. You couldn't hear it. Got annoyed when I showed him contempt, skipped family gatherings. I thought it was my fault. Took me years to realize, get angry. She gazes at me. Even with her sight failing, she can see, and she's pissed. My mother is 77, fragile health. Each person who connected him to us, her sister, her nieces, has died. I stepped through this door. I think he molested his daughter. We'll never forget how she cried out, "Don't touch me, get away from me," when we walked into her bedroom one night to check on her. You were there. She was 3 years old. I pray for his daughter from his second marriage. The next year, my younger sister went to New York, stayed with these cousins. He did it to her too. We learned, years later, when wounds found words, too late for warnings. So that speaks to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, I thanks, Elisa. I'm still a little speechless even
Yes,
hearing that again.
So powerful. Yeah.
But I in several of the pieces, it reminds me of also Lynn's piece, where one of the things that comes up is that you know you're immediately shut off. And so it's, nobody, like, what's that beautiful line in the poem that says, I did tell you, right? Like, people just don't want to know. And so, or, that's the last thing they want to imagine as truth. And then you don't have agency at that age, right? So you're like, okay, like, and then from there on, for the rest of your life, you just kind of, you just shut off. And there's no safe space where to tell that story, because there isn't until, well, that's what we tried to create with this book, a safe space to tell the stories that people hadn't been able to tell, or had been telling, right? Or tried to tell, but nobody listened, and you get shut out. And then there you go, so,
We hear all these voices now, which is wonderful.
Out loud.
Yeah.
Or on paper, where you can read them alone, because when I hear poetry read aloud, it hits me. It's more powerful than I read the book, but when to hear you read it, it's
always a different experience when you hear the writer read it. Yes, it really comes alive.
To ask the next person. Richard, are you up to it?
Sure. I don't, I'm still trying to figure out this poem myself in the sense, I don't know. I guess it started me thinking how about hypermasculinity. Again, what I was bringing to was sort of the male dimension of some sort, but also as I shared with the editors, when I first came out and started going to bars and whatnot, and started getting grabbed, and started understanding, oh my God, like this is what most women would probably feel like all their life, like without, and suddenly realizing I needed to have some boundary that I never needed to have as a male in the world. But then I also started thinking about also maybe how I've transgressed boundaries in some ways too, or what is that impulse that we have sometimes to transgress those boundaries. And there was something with me that I've carried all my life too, and it's not something that would happen to me, but something that I did to someone else, which is in the long run sort of benign and just kid stuff. But I hated it all my life, and I think it was because I realized I don't know, I've just been disgusted with that moment, and this is in a sense an apology of some sort. And again, just maybe thinking about where does that toxic masculinity come from? Where do men feel they are entitled to do these things? How we're raised here, mentality or whatever. I'm flustered. Okay. Here we go. It's called El Americano in the Mirror. I'm gonna need my glasses for this. Maybe you don't remember or didn't want to, or maybe like me, you've never been able to forget. May 1979, fifth grade recess. I grabbed your collar, shoved you up against the wall behind the chapel, called you a sissy-ass Americano to your face, then punched you hard as I could. Maybe you still live as I do, with the awful crack of my knuckles slam on your jaw and the grim memory of your lip split. Why didn't you punch me back? That would have hurt less than the jab of your blue eyes dulled with pain. How you let your body wilt, lean into me. And we walked arm in arm to the boys' room, washed off the blood and dirt. Is that how you remember it? What you can't remember is what I thought when our gazes locked in the mirror and I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Maybe I love you. Perhaps even kiss you. Did you feel it too? At that instant, did we both know somehow, understand what I'm only now capable of putting into these words, that I didn't hate you, but envied you. The Americano sissy I wanted to be, with sheer skin, dainty freckles, the bold consonants of your English name, your perfectly starched shirts, pleated pants, the showy Happy Days lunchbox, your A+ spelling quizzes that I could barely pass. Why didn't you snitch on me? I don't remember now who told Sister Magdalene, but I'll never forget how she wrung my ears until I cried for you, dragged me to the back of the room, made me stand for the rest of that day, praying the rosary, to think hard about my sins. And I did. And I have for 32 years, Derek. Whether you don't remember, don't want to, or never forgot, forgive me, though I may never forgive myself.
That's always so moving.
Yeah, it is more powerful hearing everything read out loud. Too.
That's poetry.
Yeah.
The oral tradition, but yeah, I'm still trying to figure out that poem. There's something.
I think you have.
I was going to say, I think you figured it out. I think you nailed that. Yeah.
When you
There's
read
something.
it, you have figured it out, Richard. It's all right there. It's really clear, you know. I think it's wonderful.
Yes, I do too.
Yeah, you know, I think I don't know. Never mind. I'm having my cathartic moment. That's not supposed to happen. I am thinking actually of writing more about things that I haven't written actually for this book, and not you know, more like microaggressions, but also I think it's about power and more about like the how, you know, how power is taken away from you, or how like the complex dynamic, and especially in a gay masculine world, is the idea of hypermasculinity is even, I think, even worse sometimes, ironically, in a male gay world. Anyway.
Yeah, a lot of times as a male, you're told to suck it up and don't complain if you fall down. I remember my father said, "You're going to fall down a lot of times, you know, get up," and, you know. And as a teacher, I found that we do all the talking and the kids sit there at their desk and they never get heard. And poetry seems to be a way to be heard, to have your voice heard, because who would you have gone to and talked to about this? A lot of times teachers, I hope I wasn't like that, but they don't have time to listen to personal things. We have material to cover, and parents are busy with their lives. So this is a way to express yourself. And once it's on the paper, they can't tell you to be quiet. It's there forever.
Yeah.
I also think we have a lot of good pieces in here for teachers that are teaching kids of any age. I mean, not super little kids, but we have pieces that would be appropriate for, you know, school age kids, elementary school kids, and then of course, you know, high school and college.
Our youngest contributor is a former student of mine, actually. And when they submitted the poem, they were 17 years old. So yeah, it really has run the gamut.
Would you have any advice to parents, teachers, coaches, to how to raise the next generation, not to be more respectful to each other, emotionally and physically?
One of my responses is always, I think if we gave children an art from the beginning, if they had all kinds, writing. I'll never forget a class. I did a presentation at an elementary school once, and I was told, it was a poetry presentation, and I was told that the next class that was coming, the teacher had introduced poetry into this class, and that the students had already written a lot, and that this was the most engaged, behaved, wonderful group of students. And I was convinced it was because they were so into the poetry. I think if we gave the same, emphasis and value to the arts and gave children an art, a way to express themselves from the time they're very young, the same as every other, subject that they have, I think it would just, transform their experiences, and they would then, I think they would relate to the world differently, to each other differently, just to be able to express themselves. And it could be poetry, but it could be any art. I think that music, we've seen, I think that is something that needs to be, more emphasized with our children, with schools.
Yeah.
So Caridad.
Yes.
Do you have?
Am I up?
We can make that happen. Hold on.
No, yeah, absolutely. This poem that I'm about to read is more of a mental grabbing. The idea that things that are said sometimes really stick with you and affect your behavior going forward. So this, my father was always like, you mentioned yours and the suck it up. He was always, he didn't have time to validate my problems. He wanted me to focus on what I had and not, there were so many people that were worse off than me. There were starving children in Cuba. There were so many things. I don't want to hear your problems. So one of the things that he said to me once was, well, at least I didn't rape you. And it took years, right, that reaction. It took years for me to have that reaction, because at the time I thought, well, yeah, I guess I have it pretty good, But then at some point I realized, in a conversation with Nikki, actually, that I guess at some point that might have been an option, for that to even be something that would come up in the conversation seemed in and of itself so grabby. And here I am many, many years later, and I've never forgotten it. So that's what this poem speaks to. At least I didn't rape you. The wine we shared did it. You leaned in and offered me some killer advice, because we both turned to look at the brunette who passed our table on the way to the bathroom. Since you're into chicks, you might as well think as if you had a dick. You have the power of preemptive strike. Just follow her into the john. Wait until she leaves the stall and push her against the wall. Take what you want. Most guys won't admit it, but if we had our way, we'd knock you down, spread your legs, and plunge yourselves into what we want. I consoled myself with all that could have been worse than discovering you were the kind of man my father would have loved for me to marry, the kind of man who considered a woman nothing more than split and cleft, orifice, cavity, study and absence, a maw, a void. Worse than my girlhood, litany of less than thought be hammered into my head. The worst of his words, exhumed, corroborated by the pick and spade of your confession. Hija, a key that opens many locks is a master key. Don't be the slut with a busted deadbolt. I'd rather kill you than let you become a whore. At least I didn't rape you. Don't you know how lucky you are?
That one gets me every time. Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's but it is cathartic, because once it was out, and I'm able to frame that differently now, and I'm able to understand that what my father's greatest fear was that I would be sexually violated out into the world that he couldn't protect me from. So in saying that to me, he was in a very strange, toxic masculinity inspired way saying to me, I've protected you. You haven't been raped. But that's not what I heard. And that, I think, your previous question, for children must feel heard. Not just that they're talking and that you get the peanuts, wah, 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 because the adults they're not even hearing you, or you're not hearing them. There needs to be a moment of connection and being heard. So that's the other side of the curriculum. And yes, we're busy, but I don't think we're ever too busy to stop and have a teachable moment, because that too is part of the curriculum. And the only way to go forward with kindness in the world, to go back to your previous question, is to model it. And part of that kindness is knowing when a moment needs to be had, regardless of what the curriculum says.
So, Nikki, you decided you wanted to share one of the other 90.
Yes, my piece is really long, so I've decided to read a poem from our book. This is by Kathleen Chambliss. I think it's the most metaphorical poem that we have. So it isn't actually about something grabby, but you have to kind of read into it. This is called, "For a Minute There, I Thought We Could Have Been Happy." In a trailer park in a desert, Lassie met her first coyote. The coyote bowed down to her, his ears perked up and bushy tail wagging. She looked in his eyes and saw how they were silver with glimmers of honey. She couldn't help but curtsy and give him a playful bark as if to say, "I dig you too, my dear." He gave her a smile full of fangs, so sexy. "I dare you to follow me." He dashed off into the ravine and she sprung after him. She got to the bottom where he disappeared into a forest of prickly pear cacti, their fuchsia bulbs glowing like Chinese paper lanterns. The sunlight was so bright she could only see by squinting. Suddenly, she was slammed on her back, 4 coyotes ripping out her entrails and laughing, dragging her innards through the sand, snagging on the spines of cactus branches. Coyotes only pretend to play like dogs when they're starving. So it's one big metaphor about...
Allegorical.
I
Thanks
love
for
that
reading
poem.
that, Nikki, because I think that also speaks to what Elisa was saying, how art, yes, it is telling our stories, but then the art gives us ways in which to tell our stories, right? And it's not always the same way, using a form, or it gives us a vehicle with which to tell a story, which is very different than just sort of, going to the kitchen and telling your mother at 7 years old. So there's a way of telling a story that is spectacular, right?
It's a great poem, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it, Bob. It's like we're not. This isn't just confession. This is art, or I should say, the things that art can pull out of us, nothing else can do, right? This is why I'm addicted to writing, because I always say my poems are smarter than me. I'm an idiot. But when I pay attention to art, to Lisa's point, and how we can incorporate it in school, and listening to myself. To that other part of myself, things come out that other ways that there is no other way to say them.
Right.
But one of the, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you write a poem or make a drawing or something, and when a child does that, somebody reads it, and even maybe the child, himself or herself, somebody reads it or somebody sees it, so that they are, that's the cathartic part, right? So it's not just that they do it and get it out themselves, but then they are seen and they are heard, because here is my expression of it. And I mean, why do we love to go to a museum, or to, why do we like to experience the art ourselves? There's so much that it will articulate for us. And I think that the poems do this for the readers. Of course, they do so much for the writers, but this is for the readers. This is for people. Yeah.
Right.
And we do have Nikki and Carrie. Nikki's developed some curriculum, and that's on the website, right?
Carrie has, yeah.
Carrie has, but it's on the website, right?
Yeah,
So
we put it on the website.
Right.
The website has a place, a place for some of this to happen, right? For the readers, what I'm saying, at least, like your point, and to Nikki's example, right? That a guided way of using art as to tell a story rather than
right.
A few years ago, STEM became very big in the school vernacular, right? And not that I have anything against STEM, but I always say to my students, science keeps us progressing, but art keeps us human. And it is that expression. It is the art. We take pain and or joy or whatever emotion, but I tend to think, at least in my curriculum, I'm more drawn to the painful opuses, not so much to the happy ones. But we're able to take these moments that we don't know what to do with and just transform them into something beautiful, even if we're portraying something uncomfortable or downright awful and unjust. There is beauty in the telling. And I think that ultimately the four of us, we're all poets. So I'm going to take the poet cred that we're the ones responsible for the beauty in the world. And we really view it that way through that lens. And that it's almost a responsibility. And that responsibility is freeing. Because if we're not doing it, if the poets aren't writing about it, then nobody is.
But you're not only spreading the beauty, you're also spreading the healing.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
And that's the beauty, right?
Yeah, part of the beauty is the gift of giving that, like, giving that to ourselves and then giving it to someone else, right? Like,
Sure.
so
Absolutely.
that the healing, the gift keeps on giving, so to speak, and the healing continues to happen, which is what we hope the book will do. That it's not just, it's not something that, well, as we like to say, we wish it would become very irrelevant next year.
Yes.
That would be our hope, right?
Well, that's what I was
We wish it would be like just no need for it
it.
next year,
In 10 years or 50 years, when people pick up this book, hopefully they'll look at it and say, people actually behaved like that?
That's the hope, Bob.
Yeah.
That would be something.
That would be
I'm
something.
very optimistic.
Yeah.
At first we were worried about the relevancy, right? Because like I said, it started to germinate in 2016, and it didn't in November of 2016, and it didn't come out until October 2020. So that was 4 years, and we kept saying, oh, we're so worried, we're gonna lose the zeitgeist. Wrong. Every few months there was something outrageous, something obscene that had happened in the public forum. So at one point, I think we kind of patted each other on the back and said, we don't have to worry about the relevancy. Unfortunately, it continues to be relevant.
Yeah.
Will it ever end? I don't know. It's been around since millennia, since the caveman knocked the cave woman on the head and dragged her into the cave. So I don't know. It would be our fondest and greatest hope. But maybe if there are more narratives like this, more stories being told like this, more empathy, we can start to change that reliability one person at a time.
Well, there's an expression that silence means consent. And you have definitely not taken the road of silence. You've given a voice to many, many people, and maybe it'll encourage other people to tell their story.
And also to listen. I think that's, we may not be able to, not we, but things may continue, but if at least people listen more, then things can change. So
I think it does give people the courage. These writers are so courageous, for what they've done. And, we're just honored to be able to put this out there and honor their courage and their voices. And, I think that will, hopefully encourage others to have the courage to tell, their stories.
And the telling doesn't have to be public either. Even if this book inspires a journal entry, a conversation before you fall asleep at night with yourself, that's also wonderful. Because, no story is told in the same way, no story is the same, and no outlet is the same either. So the encouraging part of that is that you can do it any way you like. And
you're not alone.
Okay.
You're not alone.
You're not alone.
Exactly. Yes.
Not alone.
Well, I want to thank Richard Blanco, Caridad Moro, Nikki Moustaki and Elisa Albo for a very enlightening discussion and sharing your stories and sharing the stories of so many other people. And I hope it leaves the mark and the effect that we have a better tomorrow.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bob.
Bob.
Thank you.
so much,
Thank you so
Bob, for
much,
having us.
Bob. Thank you.
Thank you.